Your grandmother was almost 13 years old, her little sister 9 years old. I would love to hear how this event affected them. How did they respond to it later in life?
Well, our grandmother and her sister Solveig were two completely different personalities, I guess you could say. Our grandmother, Bobby, was an effervescent, bubbly, outgoing, just had a ball with life. And then Solveig, who was several years younger, she was absolutely sweet and just a wonderful, loving person. And we knew her as our grand aunt. But we were told when she was young, she was more reserved, and she did not talk about it through the years. So our cousins on that side always said, "Oh, Grandma didn't talk about it. We only know so many of these details because of Aunt Bobby." So when we were growing up and our grandmother would talk about it, and like Sue said, we would ask her to tell us stories. It seemed that what we found in later years, as we got older and heard her talk about it more, we saw her interviewed on television and heard her interviewed on radio. I think that because of her general inborn personality, she was able to take that disaster and just keep powering on. I think it was just her personality. She could talk about it with people. She was fine talking about it. And I think, she went on again to love the water. We have pictures of her as a teenager after the disaster on the beach in Chicago with her friends, and she's laughing and they're just having a ball. So there are so many people who never wanted to step foot in the water again from stories we've heard from people. But she loved the water and she wasn't going to let this disaster ruin her life. I guess you could say that. So then when our father was a little boy, she taught him how to swim up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. He then learned to love the water. And then when Sue and I came along, they taught us to love the water. And this was one thing she did tell us when we were young girls, when she would tell us about this disaster. She said, "This is why it's so important for you girls to know how to swim.
Mhm.
You have to know how to swim." Because I think even in between those decks where they were trapped, she was able to even tread water. There's a technique to even treading water. So she knew how to do that. So I think, she went on to continually love water. And then as the years went on, and Sue mentioned too that Ernie Carlson was the childhood friend who helped teach her how to swim. They were family friends, and I believe they were all up in Wisconsin at a cabin, maybe for a couple of summers. We don't know for sure if they went every year. Um, but after our grandmother was widowed and Ernie was widowed, in the mid 70s, he got in touch with her and they met. They hadn't seen each other in so many years, and they instantly fell in love. And they had kind of been they didn't go together. They didn't go together when they were young kids, but they had crushes on each other. And he was a couple of years older than she was. And anyway, it's just such a sweet story to think that she credited him with saving her life because she knew how to swim. And all those years later, they would get married and they had 7 beautiful years together. And then he passed away in his sleep on his birthday. But they had a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And it's just so awesome how that came around for full circle
Mhm.
for both of them years later. As far as our Aunt Solveig, again, she never talked about it. So, and she was a lot younger. So I don't know, it might have affected her very differently. Our grandma was affected greatly by it. And in those later years when we would see her interviewed, I remember she said, I can go back and I feel like it was yesterday. So at that time she was in her mid 80s, early 80s to mid 80s being interviewed, and she could go back and she said, and I can still hear the screaming. So But again, it was something that she didn't let it bring her down. She still loved life, and when she was with Ernie, they went on several cruises. She went to Hawaii. It was just amazing. So, mhm.